Our next speaker is one of Australia's most respected academic leaders in digital learning, teaching transformation and student experience. Professor Tania Broadley is Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education at ACU, where she drives institutional-wide strategy in educational innovation, academic quality, digital learning and student success. Professor Broadley's career spans senior leadership positions at the University of Canberra, RMIT, QUT and Curtin universities. Her academic contributions focus on teacher education, online learning and the design of technology-enhanced learning environments. She's also very widely published in these areas. Professor Broadley brings a powerful and nuanced understanding of how generative AI is reshaping education, research, workforce capability and intellectual property, and also to mention the digital integrity that sits behind all that. So can I please welcome to the stage Professor Tania Broadley.
Now, do I have a clicker? Is that the clicker here? Is this the clicker? It is. Should have been briefed earlier. I think it's the green button. What a beautiful bio. Thank you. I didn't write it. I feel like Copilot did it, but it's really very nice. I'll have to borrow it off you. Look, I don't know if it's all of those things, but hello to you all and thank you so much for the invitation and the warm welcome, Unimutual, for inviting me here to speak with you today. Wow. Brad. Working in the sector for over 20 years and having some senior roles with a whole lot of responsibility in shaping and in leading and in protecting universities, I feel both energised and exhausted because I think that's our reality. And it is our reality, and I think it's great that we see speakers that bring such provocation to us as a sector. But I wake up some days and I think, should I just put the covers back over my head? Because in the reality of our world right now in the sector is both one of, I think, opportunity and one of great challenge. And so I'm going to speak a little bit today about where I think we've come from, where we are and where we're going. Both what I'm seeing kind of at a national level, internationally, but also from my own perspective of my new role where I've been for just over 12 months at the Australian Catholic University. And you've heard all the other places I've worked, so hello to all of you from those wonderful institutions. I've had a really beautiful career through this sector. I cannot tell you, this is very brutally honest, how pleased I am that I'm at the end of my career. I really can't tell you. I love universities, but and you'll see in the next speaker as well, it's a whole new game. I think, we're at this sort of inflection point of how do we hold on to the truth? How do we hold on to the great things universities have been for this world and navigate those new opportunities in ways that will leave us in a better place, because we have a big role to play. And I could talk about all of that for a very long time, but I hope you see where I'm going with this. Where are my ACU people? Are they here somewhere? Hello, ACU people. I can see a few of you over there. What a privilege to work at this institution after working at 4 other places which I've loved and have really shaped who I am as a leader. It's a fabulous place to work right now at this very point in time, and I'm going to share with you why. Because right now, from my perspective, we have technology and innovation, which we are all going to be and are, and I'll show you what we're doing in that space, leading through and developing students with real skills for the future and research that matters, but in an ethical way. And I think that's the most important part right now, is to think about what are the ethical ways that we develop our students and our research in this space. So we're not emerging, and it's a scary place to be because it's actually been an onslaught, as we've suggested, since 2023 when we saw the advance of the large language models. And the question now is, how do we govern this without a government who is actually doing this very strongly for us as a sector, which we don't invite all the time. We've got enough going on, and I think the Student Ombudsman's coming, and we've got ATEC and all the great things happening across the sector to help govern us at the moment. But really this is about us and how do we govern, enable and scale this in an ethically responsible way. So we know the speed of adoption is outpacing us, and our policies, our governance frameworks, our risk appetites are really not set for ways that are going to support us through this in a way that is agile. So we've got a lot of challenges as a sector that we're dealing with. We know that when we first saw this onslaught of LLMs back in when ChatGPT hit the desktops of all of our students and all of our staff, that we started as a sector to think about how can we stop this, or how can we manage this in a way that we could control it? And very quickly we turned to, actually this is not a controllable thing. This actually needs to be governed, it needs to be adopted, it needs to be worked with for all the reasons that we know matter. But the problem for us, I think, is that the onslaught was so fast, and our frameworks and our opportunities to manage and govern in that way are a bit slower in the institution for a whole lot of very good reasons. So what we've seen is, I think, early adopters, and we saw people stand up earlier in the room, early adopters in our institutions have actually, merged forward before the institutional frameworks were ready to do so. And so now we kind of feel like we're backpedaling and getting a good sense of how to manage that. TEXA did a really good job for us early on in the space by coming out and saying, show us your institutional way of managing AI in the educational research space. But what wasn't part of that really in terms of our response to the regulator was, and how does that affect your workforce capability, and what does that mean for your professional services? And so universities who were doing great work in the space really started to think about that whole of organisation approach around education, research, and that workforce capability piece. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I think we all recognise that AI is not really a technology issue right now. It's more about a people issue. And it's really about our institutional capability to be able to move forward in ways that are going to protect our students, protect our staff, and offer them the opportunity to innovate where they need to. We know that, as I suggested, it's not just learning, teaching and research. This is actually much more than that. And from my role as a DVC academic, it's kind of my place of starting is learning and teaching and research. But for all of you in the room, you know that it's really around capability, the administration, the service, the advice that you provide and how you manage through that. So I wanted to share a little bit of global data that's come out recently. This is a report by Microsoft for 2025 called, I think it's just called AI in Education, actually, the report. You can find it online. But essentially, the interesting part of this is the part on the left, which talks about leaders and educators and how their views differ on what's happening in AI in their institutions. So when you start to look at the first one about it's integrated into your school or district's curriculum, leaders are saying, yes, it is, and educators are about 30% different in points. So you can see that the difference between perceptions of what's going on and what leaders think is going on is different in some organisations in the education sector. I want to just pause for a minute and talk about education and its risk around AI and technology. I just recently been in Singapore with Microsoft last week, and they were talking about the risk to education in terms of cyber and other technology issues. And they started talking about the research that shows that number one risk for Australia is defence, number two is IT, and number three is education. So we are a very high-risk sector when it comes to cyber. We might hear a bit more about that in a minute. But important to show that leaders and educators at those different grassroots levels have different perceptions of how AI is being integrated. And importantly, what we know, and we've been provoked a little earlier around what the future of business and industry might look like, we know that it's a changing job market. So from the same report, we can see that by 2030, which is literally just around the corner, the skills in most jobs will change, and AI is the primary catalyst for the change. So we have to think about how we're preparing graduates of the future, how researchers are having capability to use the tools, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute, because the word frontier came up in Brad's talk, and frontier is something that the world is talking about from a business perspective. There's a report recently came out called The Year the Frontier Firm is Born. Has anyone read it? It's an interesting read. It's a Microsoft report again. It's from 2025, so last year, and essentially what it's saying is the workforce will shift, and as Brad talked about the agents and what the role of leaders will be, and sometimes not even leaders, what the role of the workforce might be. So you can see here, we're actually a lot of people working at this phase one across all of our organisations using AI as their assistant. What can you reproduce for me quickly? What basic tasks can you pick up and take on and feed back to me quickly? Plugging things into Microsoft Copilot or Claude or whatever your organisation is supporting, and getting it to do these kind of quick tasks that we used to do ourselves. What's really interesting is where it's going to go, and pretty quickly, and I think that's what we were listening to Brad talk about in relation to where is Atlassian and those big companies that are making these job cuts going. And it's around this human agent teams piece. So the phase two part, we're starting to see that across industry. I've not heard so much of this. It might be happening in terms of our universities, but not around the job cuts piece. I haven't heard them connected together at this stage, and I'd be interested to know if you've heard any differently. But I'm thinking human agent teams won't be too far away from us, and in fact, if it's happening, it might not be linked to the job cuts, which is a good thing, but essentially what we're going to see is these teams of digital colleagues, and how do people operate as more of a manager of agents. And so it's a totally different skill set than what we're used to doing. And it's pretty scary, actually, if you're thinking about people and culture and the way that you bring staff on a journey. It's not an easy shift. I think it will be one of the hardest shifts we've seen in our lifetime, actually. So that's the whole, can I stay in my bed and put my head over the covers, head under the covers, because I think that, people are our most important asset in universities. We don't have ore in the ground. We don't sell... we don't sell anything. We are building knowledge, we are building capability, we are building a better society through the work that we do in universities. So it's an interesting phase. And so I won't dwell on that too much. But one of the things I think, if we think about risk frameworks and just frameworks to understand the way that AI is integrating into education, what's been really, I think, really interesting is the way that schools and K-12 sector led some of this, and straight out of the box. So as soon as 2023 started, schools were being very much forced down a path at the beginning around ban it, ban it, ban it. And we learnt really quickly, you can ban it in a systems way inside your university or your school, but students are bringing their own devices and accessing all these other platforms, and so you really can't ban something that is out there. And so the principles became very important very quickly. And this was really leading work out of Australian school sector, which was their framework for Gen AI in schools, and really starting to get people to think about how all these issues of fairness, transparency, privacy, confidentiality, security, safety, who's accountable, how do you govern it, that framework was a really foundational piece for us in Australia at that time. Moving more recently to 2025, so it took 2 years for the university world in Australia, the higher education sector, to come out with something similar. And this work was led by Jason Lodge from UQ. Anyone from UQ in the room? Hello, UQ. And they did some great work. Him and a group of other colleagues across the sector worked on this work through Access, which is at Curtin, which is the Australian Centre for Education and Equity. So they have a Australian framework for AI in higher education. But I just want to pause for a moment as you read through this quote, which is actually quoted in their report. Because what it's begging us to do is to pause, take a breath, and think about, why are we here? And it's not actually saying ban it, but it's saying for 2 years now, we've seen it unleashed into the world, doing great work with people, but it's also asking us to think about, what is the role of education? So it's that inflection point. We need to take stock and think about it, but we also need to adopt it. So we're at this really, we're on the seesaw, I think. That same report talks about 7 principles of education. And as you read through the report from 23 by the school sector versus the higher education report just last year, what you start to see is a real shift in the way that the principles have matured as we've understood what AI might mean for us in the sector. But number 1 in this report is a human-centred approach. And I think we have to keep grounding ourselves in this human-centred approach to manage the risks that we will start to see emerge over time in terms of AI. And so I feel like I'm sort of taking you off the wow factor and bringing you back to kind of where I think we need to be around ethical decision-making and evidence-informed innovation, and really grounding ourselves in how do we ensure that development and deployment of this is in an ethical way with ethical standards. And so this is a really good report from Jason Lodge and other colleagues. And they're not saying ban it, they're not saying don't use it, they're saying use it in ethical ways. And I think it's an interesting perspective. That same report talks about the what next. So what are we going to see around future development areas that the higher education sector might need to consider? Too many words, I know, not enough pictures, sorry. It's an academic thing. But what you can actually see here is, again, it's around governance and institutional policy. So we really have to be sure on our frameworks, our accountability, and I want to move a bit quickly so I can get to a discussion with you, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but it's going to be interesting for us to see how these bed down over the coming years, because they're going to have to become, I think, frameworks that will give us assurance, and then frameworks that will also allow agility in safe ways. So we've got to find a balance of how we do this. ACU, let me talk a little bit about what we're doing there in terms of governing AI. So just full disclosure, I walked in and this was gifted to me, and I'm pretty happy with where it's sitting. University of Canberra, anyone here from UC? Hello UC. I developed the response to TEXA at UC, which looked at our approach there and set up the governing of AI at UC. But at ACU, this was done because of the time frame before I entered, and it's actually really strong. So I'm pretty happy with how we're doing this, and I haven't made a lot of adjustments to it. Essentially, we have a whole of university governance through the AI Council, which I am the chair of, established in 2024. You can read through those kinds of what our terms of reference are and what our focus is. But essentially, it's not just, the AI Council is not just around education, it's not just around research, it's actually around whole of institution, capability, administration, workforce development. And so that group of people has a really diverse range, including an external expert from another university, but we have ethics and philosophy academics on there, which constantly challenge us. And we've got our CIO and all of the right people, director of libraries, and I think having those academics that are it's kind of like putting the black hat on. But what about this, and have you thought about that, and what about our people, and what about this? So those really questioning people that ask you about where you're taking the university, and I think that's a really important thing to have. Here are our core principles for using AI in teaching, research and research training. I guess the thing I wanted to point out here from an ACU perspective is having that, the Catholic social thought processes inside has actually given them a nice strong mission around how to use AI, and it's something that I think is a point of differentiation for this university from other universities, so they can ground themselves very much in this respect for human dignity and the common good. And so as we think about AI, and I'll show you that we are doing things with AI, These questions are the ones that we're answering as we do this work, and I think it's important to do so from a humanity perspective. So we looked a little bit at the stats from the Microsoft report about percentages of use, and you remember that the educators in that survey, and there was a lot more of them, talked about 58% were saying they were using it. We ran this survey last year across our academic and professional staff. It wasn't a huge sample size, so I won't tell you that it's the best research based on response rates, but it gave us a touch point and a flavour of what was happening in our university, and I think that's really important if you haven't seen that at your own university, to ask if you can get that done, because I think you want to know what's going on across your university. So 78% of our staff in that survey had tried using AI in their role. That's worded that way for a very important reason. It doesn't mean they liked it, it doesn't mean they use it every day, it meant they tried it. 78% of staff have tried using it for admin tasks, so you can see it's that how do you do things to make your job quicker and easier. 30% said they'd never used AI for assessments. I wouldn't assume that means the other 70% have, but they're saying, line in the sand, I will not do that for assessments. And that's a global trend, actually. We're seeing a lot of education institutions talking about, I'm happy to use it for learning plan and lesson planning and curriculum development and course delivery, but I'm not happy to use it for assessment. As a human, I still want to be clear that there is that level of quality assurance and that level of validation in the assessment piece. So how are we using it? I'll just skim through this so we can open a dialogue before we have to go to morning tea. University of Sydney, where are you? Can't see anyone. University of Sydney, Cogniti is a tool many of you may have heard of. There's an AI assistant developed there by Professor Danny Liu. Early work, they've been trialling it, piloting it, and then they shared it with the sector, which is actually what we want to see more of across higher education. We should not all be developing and spending money on the same things. We really need to start collaborating on those things that are not really about competitive edge or distinctive offering. What can we do to share services or to share things that are going to be, I guess, progressing the sector in a good way? So Cogniti is a tool from UniSyd, and our staff are using it for a whole lot of things around chatbots for students. How do I answer FAQs about the course that are just asked all the time and I'm not responding to those 200 emails that ask me the same thing? They're using it for those sort of administrative tasks and also simulation. They're using it to kind of, I'll show that we've got staff who are using it for things like I can test my OT skills with this like it's a real patient, so you can give the agent a personality, an age, you can give it a tone that it will talk to a student and to practice before they go out into the field on what they're doing. We've got a partnership with Microsoft, as many people do in this room, and we've got a project with Agile Insights with them. We're looking at how we've put an agent that will look at all of our units. So if you're a finance person or in the room, you'll know that we have a proliferation of units across the university, and that's not always easy to manage. We're using AI to go tell us which learning outcomes are the same across our whole unit profile. We want to have a good look at it, and we're getting it to do a big data search on things that would be very difficult for us to do as humans. What we do with that next will be a human decision, but we're getting it to do those fast analytical tasks that humans would take longer to do. Won't read through all of that. We're starting to use it to look at RPL so that we can give students faster turnaround on their RPL. Humans set the constraints, humans set the criteria, AI does the work, human checks, done. Much faster in a way of servicing our students. Commonwealth Prac payments, who's heard that term? Yep, some of you in the room. As you know, the government rolled out a scheme last year around paying students to go on their placement to deal with placement poverty. We're all very, very supportive of that. It's been an absolute nightmare, if I can be honest, to implement that. Universities had to implement it, not the government. So we had a small 4-month turnaround to be able to put that into place. We're using AI to streamline those applications and evaluation and improve our turnaround time. We've got to pay students for their placement so they get that money in a timely way. ACU has the highest number of prac payments in this country because of the health and education focus that we have. And so I think the Minister is a little shocked at how much money he has to keep giving us to pay these students, but we like it. The most important part here is that we're using it to, again, to do those eligibility checks on all of the data that students provide as they apply, and then we are human in the loop. Everyone gets checked as an oversight, but it's much quicker than if we were actually doing all of the base work ourselves. Research, we've seen it in our research as well, and on our AI Council we have researchers who come and share with us what they're doing. They are using agents to do the literature reviews. Honestly, we can have a whole conversation about how do you do a PhD in the world of AI, but we won't do that here today. And so what we know is that AI is already in our universities. It is being used for both workforce capability, it is being used for operational services, it is being used for education and research. And I think, we're going to hear from a CIO soon, and that will be really interesting to hear his view on it. But we know that we have challenges. We are grappling with capability gaps. So we can talk about who's using it, we can talk about the data, but when you get behind that and you start looking, there are people who just won't want to use this. We've got students who won't use this. And so we're seeing a real shift and a bit of a gap emerging between those kinds of cohorts of staff and students. We need to scale it, but we need to maintain consistency and quality and assure ourselves of everything that we're doing. Policy's got a long way to go. We've all got an AI policy. I think that's something, as the AI shifts quickly, we also need to think about updating. So I think there are some real gains with AI that we'll see, and I think some of this needs strong governance. And so I think I'm preaching to the converted in this room, but from a leadership role in higher education, I think that's what keeps us awake at night.